What's going on, YouTube? This is SG1 Sports, and you're watching our college football channel. Time for my 5 takeaways from Week 8, and what a week it was. We saw some big upsets, we saw some close calls, and we're just 1 week away from the first college football playoff rankings. So, again, just going to give you my takeaways, big picture here in college football, starting with Ohio State and Michigan. Ohio State and Michigan could both make the college football playoff. In fact, I think it's becoming more and more likely that that is the case. Not just because of these two teams being impressive, but also just what's happening across the rest of the country. Pac-12, I don't know if they're going to get a playoff team. We'll talk about them more. Same thing with the Big 12. And then you really only got Florida State in the ACC, so if something happens to them, there is definitely looking like there's potentially going to be a conference to get 2 teams in, whether it's the SEC or it's the Big 10, and there's scenarios, I think, for both of those 2 conferences. But just look at Ohio State and the way they beat Penn State. I think that I have kind of not been as high on Ohio State so far this year just because the offense is not what it normally is. But you have to look at how much better they are on defense. No, the offense is not as great as it has been in the past, but the defense is much, much better, and they're really winning because of their defense. And you've got a difference maker in Marvin Harrison Jr. out there. So this offense is good enough. It's not the best offense in the country, like they are top 5 offenses in the country like they have had in the past, but it's good enough, and the defense is really, really good. And for Michigan, I think that they're still in a great spot. I mean, they dominate against Michigan State. Really haven't seen them tested, so we could be in for a shock when Michigan plays Penn State. They could go out there and get embarrassed. But I think that we've seen enough, and over the last couple of years, and just the way Michigan plays, I feel pretty confident that this team is a really, really good team, and they get Ohio State at home. So they win that game, and they go undefeated, and Ohio State has a resume with wins over Notre Dame and Penn State, and they lose it, still say a close game against Michigan. Michigan's the number 1 or number 2 team in the country. Ohio State's going to have a really good shot to get in there at 11-1. If Ohio State beats Michigan, I don't know if Michigan is going to have much of a case because their schedule is not as tough, but if they're really dominant in the rest of these games and they beat Penn State by a lot, they could possibly get in there at 11-1 as well. But there's definitely a path for these 2 teams to both get into the college football playoff. And again, it's looking more and more likely. Both teams have been very impressive, and really these might be the 2 best teams in the country. All right, number 2, the Pac-12. It's wide open. So I thought USC would take care of business against Utah and kind of eliminate Utah this weekend. And we did learn that Cam Rising will not play again this year, but maybe they don't need it. Bryson Barnes played really well in their game this week. The defense, we know it's really good, and so Utah is definitely still alive. USC is still alive as well because they've only got 1 conference loss. So I don't, playoff wise, yeah, USC is done, but Pac-12 championship is still in reach for USC. But they've got all these teams in the Pac-12 have a tough schedule coming up. It's going to be really interesting. We saw Washington struggle. Really for the second time. They struggled against Arizona State. Oregon, maybe they're the best team in the Pac-12, even though they lost to Washington. But it's wide open. Washington has no losses. USC has 1. Oregon State has 1. Oregon has 1. Utah has 1. And maybe UCLA and Arizona are still alive. They've only got 2 losses. I really feel like it's going to be tough for a team to come out of the Pac-12 undefeated or with 1 loss. And undefeated, Washington's the only team that remains. I think it's going to be tough for a team to come out of here with 1 loss because, again, these teams are all about to beat up on each other the rest of the season. All of them have tough schedules. And so it feels like the Pac-12, and this is what I expected. I predicted that the no Pac-12 teams to get in the college football playoff, despite this conference being really, really good. The teams are just going to beat up on each other. And speaking of preseason predictions, just back to Ohio State and Michigan, if you remember, I did have Ohio State going 11-1, only losing to Michigan and making it to the college football playoff. So that prediction is starting to look much more likely. Again, both of those things potentially could happen. Number 3, Florida State versus, do you remember, the ACC Wheel of Destiny? As some of you young folks out there may not remember on college football final, but it was always a funny thing there at the end of the day when you had college football final with Mark May and Lou Holtz, and they would because it seemed like no one wanted to win the ACC, and it especially happened in the Coastal Division. Where it just every year was different, every week was different. You never knew who was going to win that division. Well, it's kind of back in the ACC. Florida State, I think they're set. They're going to, even if they lose a game, Florida State should be in the ACC championship. But who are they going to face? And I have no idea at this point. You've got Louisville with only one loss, but they lost. I mean, they lost to Pitt. If they lost to Pitt, they can lose to anybody. And then let's talk about North Carolina for a second, losing to perhaps the worst team in the ACC, Virginia. And they only have one loss, so they're still alive. But if they can lose to Virginia, they can lose to anyone. And that was a huge shocker. I mean, that was probably the biggest shocker of the weekend. North Carolina losing at home to Virginia. Definitely a head scratcher. I mean, I have no idea. It's crazy. And we're going to see more things like that. We're not even into November yet. So just wait, buckle up. That's why I talk about the Pac-12. We're going to see some upsets and things there and a lot of big games. That's why I don't think they're going to get a team in the playoff. Duke only has one conference loss. Their second loss came to Notre Dame. Virginia Tech only has one conference loss. And then you've got Boston College and Georgia Tech, NC State, Miami, and even Virginia, all with just 2 losses. And that team that plays Florida State, very good chance that they have 2 losses at least. So it's definitely wide open in the ACC, just like in the Pac-12. And I kind of got away from that in the Pac-12. Let me just back up for a second. We go back to the Pac-12 here. When I talk about the Pac-12 being wide open, what I mean here is the fact that Washington does not, if you look at some of their games, they don't look like they're just going to run away with this conference. And when you've got all those tough games, you've also got Oregon, who has a really good shot with just that one loss. Oregon State has a really good shot. Utah has a really good shot. USC. So all these teams that have just one loss, they're definitely still alive. And that's why I say the Pac-12 is wide open. It's definitely going to be interesting. I know I kind of got into the talk about Pac-12 not getting into the college football playoff, but as far as that conference race goes, it is wide open, and you've got a lot of teams that still have a great shot to get to the Pac-12 championship. But again, it's Florida State versus somebody in the ACC, and I have no idea who that is. By the way, Clemson, when I named all those teams with 1 or 2 losses, Clemson has 3 conference losses. Clemson is near the bottom of this conference. That is just crazy. So yeah, it's definitely a wild year in the ACC. Florida State seems to be able to, so far has been able to survive. We'll see if that continues. Number 4, Texas and Oklahoma, they aren't sure bets. And I'm talking about 2 things here. First of all, the Big 12, and you look at that conference race, these teams are not sure bets to both get to the Big 12 championship like I kind of thought they were coming into this week. And I think you're not necessarily going to see these 2 teams face off in the Big 12 championship with a winner goes to the college football playoff matchup either. Both teams look vulnerable. Oklahoma struggled, had to come from behind to beat UCF. They're going to have a lot more games like that. They've got Kansas coming up on the road. I think Oklahoma State is on the road, and that team's playing really well right now. So they will be tested. Texas still has Kansas State. They still have TCU. They struggled this week. Quinn Ewers is injured. I don't know how long he's going to be out. So both of these teams definitely look vulnerable. And when you look at the Big 12 conference race, we'll just start there. You've got Iowa State. They've only got 1 loss. Oklahoma State only has 1 conference loss. Kansas State only has 1 conference loss. And then you got a bunch of teams with just 2 losses. So this conference is still up for grabs. It's not necessarily going to be Oklahoma, Texas. And then in the college football playoff race, for these 2 teams to play in a Big 12 championship game where the winner does go to the playoff, you're going to have Texas not lose another game, and Oklahoma can afford to lose 1 game, which is kind of what I've been predicting, and they have to both get there at 11-1. I don't know that happens. You know, Oklahoma, they could lose 1 or 2, and Texas could easily lose another game, and we might not see that matchup that we thought, and we might not see a Big 12 team in the college football playoff. So that's a big takeaway from this week, and I don't want to overreact to 1 game, but you know, Oklahoma at times before that didn't look great at times. Same thing with Texas, and I think with the schedules they have coming up, the pressure, and that's the big thing, is the pressure that starts to build. When you start to win, you start to feel the pressure, and we're going to see that with some of these teams, and that's how you a lot of times get upsets. Look at North Carolina, and look at almost Oklahoma this week. All right, number 5 takeaway, Alabama versus LSU. That will decide the SEC West. I feel pretty confident on that now. There were some scenarios here. If Tennessee had beaten Alabama, Ole Miss would have definitely still been alive, and who knows what potentially could have happened there. But with Alabama beating Tennessee, that means that as long as LSU wins out after they beat Alabama and they get both Florida and Texas A&M at home, then LSU is going to go to the SEC championship. If Alabama wins this game, they're a lock. There's no way that they're not getting in to the SEC championship. Going back to this Alabama-Tennessee game, Boy, it really felt like Tennessee was the better team. Felt like they were going to win. And then Alabama, they turned it on in the second half. I thought they played a lot harder. They made some good adjustments at halftime. And just some bad decisions by Tennessee and going for it on fourth down when they really should not have. And if you're going to, and this just drove me crazy yesterday, run a QB sneak. I mean, I saw game after game after game. 4th and 1, quarterback's in the shotgun, and they try a quarterback run or an option play or something stupid when you only need sometimes a half a yard. And for Tennessee, I mean, you got Joe Milton, who is a huge quarterback. I know teams don't practice that anymore, but maybe you should. Maybe you should. I think every team should be able to take a snap from under center and run a quarterback sneak. That really bugged me this weekend. Again, I think there was at least four games where that happened on 4th and 1, and the team just got stuffed. But yeah, Alabama, LSU, looks like that's going to be another huge matchup that will decide the SEC West. Georgia on the East, I think they're locked in now. If Tennessee could have made it through this game and only had one conference loss going into that Georgia game, they would still control their destiny if they could beat Georgia. And I think they've got a shot. If they play the way they did in the first half against Alabama, and they'll be playing at home, so that'll help. I think they've got a shot against Georgia. Now they would have to beat Georgia and then have Ole Miss beat Georgia. So they really need some help there, which Ole Miss is looking really good. So who knows? Maybe that could happen. So I'm not going to say Tennessee's out of it, but it feels like Georgia's in a really good spot there. And then in the West, Alabama, LSU will decide that division. But we have to wait 2 weeks for that game. Both teams on a bye this week, so not a whole lot happening in the SEC. As far as the big picture conference race, unless Florida were to upset Georgia, that could obviously shake things up as well. But those are my takeaways as we are, again, one more weekend, and then we get the first college football playoff rankings, and then the pressure will really start to build. I think this could be a pretty crazy November. I think there's a lot of parity in college football, and I think we may get some big upsets, some great games, and a lot of excitement coming up in this last month. What were your takeaways from Week 8? Let me know down in the comments below.